Okay, so the meeting is recording. So I guess just formally to say welcome and thank you to everybody for joining. This the idea of this meeting is this is a like a subgroup of ISCET. So we are a working group working on the development of a survey or questionnaire. And the idea of that survey was to try and find out some more information about who is using eye tracking clinically and whether the clinical users of eye tracking think it's a good idea for us to develop some guidelines or some standards to work towards and find out whether there is a consensus on a priority for what aspects of clinical eye tracking we should work on first. Do we think that summarises where we're up to?
I would say that in the ISCET meetings themselves, we've kind of come to the consensus that the standards are needed, but it is more about trying to work out who's out there currently using eye tracking that we aren't aware of. So you're right about characterising, the current state of what everyone's doing with eye tracking and which conditions are going to be most prioritised. But I think the actual need for eye tracking guidance is already established.
Okay. Would anybody like to add anything at this stage? I know that we've all been involved in previous kind of meetings, but is there anything that anybody wants to discuss before we start? Or are we happy to just crack on? Okay, so there's been some preliminary discussion about what a survey could include. So as a working group, what we've done is kind of taken their suggestions so far and kind of developed those further. So those have been on a working document, and I'm just going to share the link in the chat to that document now. So that kind of summarises where we're up to with what us as a working group are trying to achieve, and then has put some so first of all, what I'd like us to do is to discuss what kind of platform we host this on. That has a knock-on effect for who kind of holds it and who applies for ethical approval for this survey. So I think in previous discussions we've agreed that ethical approval would be required. So I don't mind doing that through the University of Sheffield, for example, and they've said that's okay. But my university supports either Google Forms or Qualtrics. So if we wanted to use something outside of that, it might mean that somebody else has to kind of do the ethical approval part. So that does have a knock-on effect, that decision. So the first thing on the working document was a little vote on what platform or technology we use. There was a comment from C1 about China not supporting Google, so that may have an effect on not being able to capture some countries. But Rasha, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think if we go for Qualtrics, it would just shorten a lot of discussion, because a lot of people mentioned in the previous meeting that Google is not compliant with PRS with at least with some countries. So I think, and let me just take this a little bit, if I can, a step forwards from what we have agreed in the other meeting. I think we have all joined this subcommittee for you to take this to Sheffield with the ethical approval of Sheffield, because you've been the lead. And also, actually, Qualtrics is there also in many UK universities. I mean, we also have been working with London, the UCL also, and I think it's good. People have suggested RedCape because it would. What they said is that it will be better in the consent and everything, but this is just I think Qualtrics would be great, and yeah, let's proceed from here if I can help.
I'm happy to vote for Qualtrics as well, and I agree. I think consent would be fairly easy to put up front on the first page of a survey in Qualtrics, and just have yep, this is what we're doing, this is why, yep, I consent, and then keep going. You can also put in it that we wouldn't include anything that wasn't finished. So if they got partway through it, we would discard a partial survey as well. So that would be the other way to to have the consent aspect in the there. But I think Qualtrics is pretty well accepted and would be pretty easy to work with. So that's my vote.
Thanks, Amanda. Matt?
Yeah, I was going to say that I was unaware that Google was not available in China, so that means that my vote's for Qualtrics as well.
Does anybody have an opposition to Qualtrics or kind of a reason for us to consider something alternative? No? Okay.
No.
So that sounds like we are fairly unanimous at this stage that Qualtrics is the best option to use going forward. So the next thing on the agenda or the kind of working group list of tasks is to actually put the survey together. So on the working document, Matt moved over our previous questions for discussion. It's quite lengthy, was my first thought. So I think...
Sorry, I should say that I just moved them all verbatim. There are duplicate questions. There are questions that don't quite make sense, but I just wanted to bring everything into this document. So I haven't made any decisions in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, this is just our starting point, isn't it? So open to the floor. What were people's thoughts, or what do people think is a useful way to proceed? Do we want to have quite a lengthy questionnaire that goes into more detail, or do we want this to try and be a little shorter and snappier, Matt?
So I think one of the first things we need to decide is exactly how many branches of this survey there are. I mean, obviously we're interested in talking to manufacturers, but we're also interested in talking to clinicians, and we're also interested in talking to the professional bodies that represent clinicians. As far as I'm aware, those are kind of the three main groups that we'd be approaching, and they would obviously have different questions to be asked. And then there maybe would be a fourth subset of questions that would go to everyone. That's how I've split these up, but I wanted to maybe one of the first things we should just identify is how would we split them up? Is that a reasonable set of questionnaires? So you'd essentially have 3 questionnaires, but there'd be common questions amongst them. That's my suggestion, at least.
So kind of 3 routes, starting with some common questions, but then kind of 3 routes based on their answer.
Yeah, just to rationalise.
Yes.
So it's a straight up yes from Bjorn. That's helpful. Obviously, you're probably coming at this with, correct me if I'm wrong, Bjorn, with a bit more of a manufacturer kind of view on this. What do you think about that proposal?
Yeah, we come as manufacturers, but we also come as test designers, and we come as researchers. Myself, I'm doing a PhD on one of the tests. So for some users, like at least for Bulbitech, it would probably be me to have fill out a couple of surveys. It wouldn't be that hard. But I think in order to get people to actually answer the surveys, it would probably be smart to do as Matt says, to target them specifically into those 3 groups so that we get compliance. I'm not a marketing person, but I could imagine, if someone gets a huge survey and they don't really think that it applies to them, that we might not get the response that we are looking for.
Sorry, were you going to come in there, Matt?
I was really going to ask if anyone thinks there should be any other groups we should be targeting, or are those 3 reasonable? Is there anybody else that, that ultimately what we want to know is who is out there doing eye tracking right now in a clinical sense, and I feel that those are probably the best. I mean, the next question, of course, is then how do we identify all of those people to actually go and ask? We've had a bit of an exercise going on for a while now through the main ISCET group, which was to identify known professional bodies, things that I know, for example, there haven't been a lot of audiologists, but there are some people obviously doing vestibular stuff, and that haven't had as much representation in ISCET. So we also, there are possibly groups out there doing clinical eye tracking that are so dissociated from the context that we currently have within the society that we may need to just make sure we're covering everyone.
I mean, it could be that we say, are you answering this on behalf of a manufacturer, clinician, professional body? And then we could have other, and they could just, fill in what they feel they represent. But we would then have to have some decision on what questions they would answer, obviously, but that might allow us to find out whether there are people answering that feel they don't fit into one of those categories.
Their questions could be fairly open-ended if we did have an other category. So they could be, rather than sort of thinking through and going, okay, you know, tick box and whatever else, they could be a lot more descriptive in terms of thinking through. One of the first questions could be, you know, in what context are you using eye tracking, for example? And just sort of basically putting up the aims of what we're trying to get out of this and having them as open text boxes for the other group.
Okay. I think Bjorn's point about he feels he could answer on kind of multiple parts is interesting. There's got to be a way in the questionnaire of either ticking the boxes and it's saying this is based on your role as a manufacturer and these questions, or this is based on, so kind of different questions appear based on your responses. Or
is there any reason to not put them out as 3 separate surveys? And if you identify as like both, to do 2?
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could either have them based on your responses, the questions appear, or maybe they get to the end and say, do you feel like you also represent somebody else? And then another set of questions.
Well, that also pumped into in my mind. It's like a multiple choice that do you represent yourself, your institution, I mean, it can be a multiple answer question. In addition to that, if we agree to have three different direct survey, I mean, this does not replace this, but I mean, in this specific question, a person can be representing the 3, but he will not fill the 3 surveys. He will choose maybe what he would represent more, and then he will just click on it, I think.
Yeah.
Matt?
Yeah, my view on this is that maybe just keep it simple and have people choose one thing that they represent. I mean, Bjorn's quite a unique situation where he's, you know, both interested in multiple views of that, but the majority of people who are going to be interviewing on this are going to have one of those 3 categories. And you can just have, you know, I'm pretty sure in quality, you can have the first question be, which of these are you? And then it just does it automatically. So you don't have to have 3 separate form links. I would, my view would be just accept that there's going to be very few people that represent more than one thing. And if they did represent more than one thing, you would end up getting duplicate responses from the same person, which also could be problematic for the analysis. So I would just keeping it simple and saying, which of these do you think best represents you? That would probably be a way of capturing it.
Any other views on that one? So choose the option. How do you feel about that, Bjorn? You're probably the one who could answer that question a bit better if it's choose the option that you feel most represents.
I think this sounds it's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if we leave it, I'm just like thinking out loud. I'm not concluding my opinion even, but I mean, if we leave it multiple, it could give depth. Like if someone has, for example, he's a clinician and he has also a expertise as a, you know, in a startup or a manufacturer. I mean, this gives depth to the answer of the person, if we will have any use of that. But I mean, this dual thing, this interdisciplinary areas also, it would be interesting to know even how many of us would I mean have this are really involved in 2, for example, parallel careers maybe that intersect. I don't know, this came into my mind, but anyway, that's not the big issue then.
I mean, it certainly arose in the last ISCET meeting, didn't it? There was a situation where there was somebody present who sounded like they were had feet in different camps. Matt?
Yeah, I suspect probably within ISCET itself, there may well be people who are, in multiple groups, as it were. I guess the main thrust of this is to try and survey people who aren't currently involved in ISCET. I mean, one of the things it might be able to attract more people to get involved, which would help us more generally. But Anyway, just wanted to point that out, that we're not just surveying ISCET's members. We're trying to survey everyone in the world who does clinical eye tracking. That's the ideal anyway.
So it sounds like we're coming to the conclusion that you could have boxes to tick to describe how you are answering the questionnaire, from what perspective, and we were asking people to choose the option that you feel best represents your use of clinical eye tracking, and that would kind of divert them down one route of the questions. And we could have some kind of, at the end, more open-ended questions that allows them to add anything additional that they feel is useful. So it might be if they've answered it from a clinical point of view, but they feel they've got those questions haven't captured something, they could add it as an open-ended at the end.
If you did that, they wouldn't have the same questions. Let's say somebody answered as a clinician and said, also, I own an eye tracking company, so I'm going to add a manufacturer. Would they then get all of the manufacturer questions? Or are you suggesting it would just be like a kind of, you think open-ended?
So I mean? More of a kind of, not an open, more like an open question at the end, an opportunity to add additional comments.
Okay. I guess that's always useful to have.
Okay.
Just thinking about how you're going to collate all the data as well is one thing, because it was going to be, published. We want to try and keep that.
It can be at the end or in the beginning, I think, also. Like you are so and so and so, choose what best for you and then proceed. Or at the end, as you mentioned. I mean, trying to imagine what would be best.
Yeah, it could come at the same time. You could have which one of these best represents you, but then you could also say, do you also feel you fit into one of the other groups as well? If so, tick. But we're going to go ahead with the questions for your kind of main discipline.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah. So choose best option, and then have a do any other options apply at the beginning. Okay. So if we go through the questions and the kind of proposed structure of the survey, and we'll just use our time and see how far we get through. As Matt said, this has very much been like a long list. So this is not a kind of final, this is not kind of a draft one. This is just everybody's suggestions so far. So the suggestion was to start with some background information that would include consent. I think we've got a suggestion to add kind of affiliation at this stage, as in describing our affiliation, or is this kind of capturing what their affiliation is? Onyeka. Oh, you're on mute.
I think now the suggestion of deciding what category you belong to kind of oversees that one, because I was thinking initially, how would you categorize who this person is? Where is this person attached to? So that initial question would, I think, eliminate that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we could change that to capture. Okay. And then we've got a small section at the beginning that is questions to ask everybody. So I guess that's what you're saying, Onyeka, that if we're gonna ask everybody the same questions there. So could have some kind of affiliation at the beginning and response.
That could go in there, yes.
Yeah. And then we've got simple questions like, do you use an eye tracker in a clinical setting? Yes, no. I added that in actually because I thought there might be some people, would we be gathering responses from people who are coming to this because they want to do clinical eye tracking, but they aren't currently, or they've had some experience of clinical eye tracking, but it's not available at the moment? I don't know. I guess I was just trying to play devil's advocate and think who might come to this.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not.
Hi, Mario. Just to let you know, we're recording this, so just wanted to double check you were okay with that. Thank you. So Mario, at the moment, we're just working through the survey suggestions, and we're just kind of going through each.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Apologies for the delay. I've had a delay with my train, so I just come in.
Thank you. I've just popped a link into the chat to the document that we're working on at present. Matt, do you want to pick up where you were?
Yeah, so I guess that we're just looking at the first question. Do you use an eye tracker in a clinical setting? I suppose that would only really apply to the clinicians, somebody who works for a professional body or somebody who is a manufacturer. The answer may well be no, even though they are relevant to filling in the survey. So I suspect that's probably, and then the clinicians, I suppose clinicians are probably the only ones that would want to say, I would like to use it, or maybe the professional bodies would as well, actually. But I do what you're saying about, are we going to be interested in people who don't currently do clinical eye tracking but would like to? It's kind of a different question, but I do think it's potentially relevant. It's just whether or not we can capture all that at the same time as being effective with the rest of it.
Yeah, I guess this is. I think the comment about professional bodies is an interesting one, because they might be trying to. Do you use clinical eye tracker, or do any of your members use it? That might be quite a difficult thing for them to answer. It might be quite a mixed answer. So I guess if we'd like to reword that to capture not just clinical users. I guess my feeling was, if the answer is no, do they just exit the questionnaire, or do we try and capture something from them that would be potentially useful? So say they aren't, but they actually really would like to, and they really would like standards developing in a thing. Have we missed an opportunity to not capture that information?
Maybe this should be limited to the clinician section then only, because as you said, the professional bodies wouldn't necessarily know.
Yeah.
I mean, they would have an idea, but, and it would be, so you could just move all of that down to the clinician questions.
But if I may ask, are we also interested in researchers with background clinicians, but maybe they're not using eye tracking in clinical use yet? I mean,
so the purpose of the survey was really to identify what is currently happening around the world with clinical eye trackers. That's the primary purpose, is who's doing it, how many are there, and what conditions are they looking at. And then the reason for that, of course, is so that ISCET can prioritize which standards do we define first. So I do think that's interesting, and I think, again, with who would like to take up more clinical eye tracking but isn't due to restrictions and or a lack of knowledge, is another interesting question. They both potentially do speak to this question of what standards should be developed first, but we may need to just be a bit more focused on the specific aims of identifying what's going on right now. Otherwise, it could be quite a long questionnaire. That's my concern, and people might not fill it in.
Yeah, and I think that's probably something we need to make very clear in that background information. This is what we're trying to achieve from this questionnaire, to capture clinical eye tracker use. If you are not doing that right now, but you want to find out more, we could kind of just signpost them elsewhere, because otherwise we're going to end up with data that's quite difficult to.
Yeah, but my question, I think, to make it clearer, are we including people who are part of the team, but they're not the clinicians themselves? I mean, because it's already we're including manufacturers and technical people, so they would not be the clinical person, but they will know a lot. I'm just raising. So I mean, this is the same question you said, Matt, but in another format, in another way. I mean,
are you thinking techs as well? So people who may not consider themselves a clinician, but would actually run the eye tracking?
Yeah,
it would probably still be relevant in that clinician section.
Yeah.
Mario and Matt, do you want to come in here?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm wondering if we should simply flip the problem around and ask in some form of other, basically, who are you? And then we look a posteriori who feels appropriate in different contexts to answer this question, because otherwise we're not capturing the use. Ultimately, if we want to capture the use, part of this capture is who are you who are using this device.
Yeah, which is kind of where I guess Onyeka's question was, you know, that suggestion, it's trying to capture who they are and their affiliation. Matt?
Yeah, just to reiterate that the purpose of including manufacturers in this was obviously, you know, the manufacturers themselves will not be doing clinical work, but they will be aware of clinicians who have come to them to purchase the eye trackers for a clinical use. So a lot of manufacturers of eye trackers don't specify, or they're not specifically a clinical eye tracking company, but things like iLink and Tobii and so on, they will know they've got people. So that was the reason for including manufacturers, was so you could say how many of your sales are for a clinical purpose. Do you know what disciplines that you know are being involved? And so yeah, that would, I think, just speaking to Rasha's point about do we talk to technical people who aren't clinicians, I would argue maybe not. But if they have some involvement or potential involvement in eye tracking clinically, then maybe. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think Rasha, the way I kind of took Rasha's point was, if you've got multiple people in a team doing clinical eye tracking, do we take responses from each individual? So maybe there's a team of kind of 5 people. Do we just want a response from the clinician, or do we want everybody's opinion? And I would say probably everybody's opinion, because it might be that the clinician thinks one thing, but somebody else in the team has a different opinion.
I would agree with that. Yeah, if it's about anybody who's involved in a clinical team using eye tracking, I would ask them all. Yeah.
Mario,
Do we have any idea of how many responses we're expecting? Because part of these decisions are also based on whether we're expecting 10, 100, or 10,000 responses, because at that point we need to process them differently.
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure how many. I guess has ISCET done anything like this before? Do we have an idea of kind of like numbers involved, or
not eye tracking, but if I can base it on similar like societies that are working in like such, you know, small areas, it could be around hundreds, like 300, 500, like even if there are a lot of people, but maybe it's like around that. Usually if we have very good reach, we can reach more, but I mean, we don't know, but I mean, should not be less than that, I mean, hopefully.
But these are numbers, however, in which you can still afford to send out the questionnaire quite broadly. And if you realize that you need to bundle them after the fact. I mean, 500 responses are still something you can manage to look at individually. If you're expecting 10,000 responses, then we're starting to talk other types of analysis.
Onyeka?
Okay, I was thinking, since we're thinking about going in the direction of asking maybe others who are involved apart from clinicians, then we probably need the subtitle of manufacturers, individuals, not individual clinicians this time around. And then the last one will be professional bodies. So in that space in the group where we have individuals, we could then capture what their affiliation is, and then specifically they could see what they use eye tracking for. That's what I was thinking.
Okay, thank you. Siwan?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the clinical setting, what is the meaning for that? Because I know some researchers are collecting some data, like for example, in our research, we collect data from people with and without depression. So, but we are not a clinician. We just do this for research purpose. Does it count into clinical setting, but it is in our lab, conducted in our lab. So it's just what is the clinical setting here?
Yeah, we've got to define that, haven't we?
Yeah.
Matt?
Maybe we could just include a question that says that in your capacity of testing patients, however that might be, is this a research-based thing, or is it something where you're processing people who are coming through from a health system, something like that? So you could capture responses from both groups, but you could at least say these people are really not actually doing it on the ground yet, which may be a large number of people at the moment, because most clinical eye trackers are not licensed. Most eye trackers are not clinically licensed. So there's a lot of people doing clinical stuff, but not doing it on the ground with people that really could do with that healthcare. And that's the point, right? Of ISCET, one of the things we want to try and get sorted.
Is it like for in clinical settings or for clinical settings could solve this? Because it could be like, as Siwan said, she's working in the lab, but for a clinical setting. And I think the word in clinical setting is smart because it's the setting. And, I mean,
I guess so. How that's been worded in my experience in the past is like in a clinical setting, or to inform. You have to be very careful when eye trackers aren't licensed medical devices. So I think how we've worded it is to inform clinical decision making, because you technically can't make a diagnosis with this equipment because it's not it's not a medical device, and the regulations in each country are different and probably quite problematic. So I think being clear about, asking a question to tease out, is this done in a clinical setting? Is this done in a research setting? Does the information inform any clinical decision making? Or is it simply that these are patients identified from a clinical setting, but they're purely seen in research? Mario?
Yes, I'm wondering if rather than phrasing it towards decision making, because we could argue that also research informs decision making, we should phrase it towards healthcare delivery, which is, if you want, a different approach to it. Are you using this to deliver a service, or are you not using this to deliver a service?
Okay. Matt?
Yeah, just to point out, we need to be aware of the fact that some clinicians are using eye trackers off-label, as in they're not clinically licensed, and so we don't want to be asking questions that people feel uncomfortable answering or putting down in writing that they are using eye tracking in their decision making, because technically they're not supposed to be using it yet, but it is actually useful. So just making sure we aren't putting people in a difficult spot where they have to admit to using something they shouldn't be.
Mario, do you have another point? No, Bjorn?
Well, we could ask, what type of eye tracker they are using. And we, based on that, you would know whether it's, so for instance, CE certified or not. But they wouldn't have to answer, the thing about, are you using it to inform clinical decisions? Obviously, our eye tracker is medically certified and it is used for that, but I think that's the exception. But to kind of get an idea of what kind of technology are they actually using, and that will then also indirectly let us know, what the question was, about.
I guess what are we kind of more interested in here? Are we interested in where the eye tracker is located, or are we interested in where the eye tracker, what the results are being used for, or both?
What we really want to know is what conditions are the eye trackers being used to diagnose. So that's the primary purpose, is which standards are ISCET going to define first. That's got to be foremost, I think. So where it's happening is possibly interesting, but if it's an international society, we're going to be going, I guess, with the majority of people that need us, wherever they might be.
So what conditions are they recording? Okay. I'm not sure who had their hand up first, so I'll just let whoever's first dive in. Sorry.
Go, Mario.
Well, a very, very stupid question. Matt, if that is what we are interested in, why don't we ask that? Saying, if we were to come up with a guideline, or call it what you want, which one would you prefer as a priority?
Lovely, thank you, Bjorn.
Yes, it would be interesting to know what are you using the eye tracker for? Is it used in a clinical setting? Is it used in research? With humans? And then kind of what type of research or usage would it be used for? Because there are several things that you could do. Some are more kind of fundamentally oriented, towards kind of understanding the visual pathways and brainstem and all that kind of stuff. Others are more towards certain conditions. And I think that could be interesting to know, because those are, different use cases. And then, of course, like the conditions that you are using in a research or clinical setting. So, is it a research or a clinical setting? And, what kind of research are you doing? What kind of diseases are you working with? Or what is the aim of the research, rather?
I'm just aware that that's really probably interesting information, but the purpose of the questionnaire is all about kind of clinical use, and I don't want us to drift off too much. Okay. If we've stated at the very beginning an introduction about, this is the purpose to kind of characterize clinical eye tracker use, and then they just tick the box, what do you do? And they just tick research. What are we going to do? Does that mean we eliminate that answer from the questionnaire because they're not actually they're not answering from that kind of clinical perspective? Or is this just that we haven't quite explained and they haven't quite ticked the right box? Do you know what I mean? If they just tick research at that stage, do we eliminate their responses?
No, it could be a research for clinical setting, for that use, because actually if we imagine real life, this is what really is. It, like, for example, any discipline you can find, as we just discussed, so you could be researching, even a clinician, but like he has a clinic, but he's on the eye tracking field, he's in research, he hasn't yet applied it for, so
Matt.
So I would suggest that researchers don't really need our guidelines. The purpose of the guidelines is to standardize clinical care across different test centers. If somebody's doing research, typically they're going to be doing using their own protocols for their own reasons and very specific situations. True, if you think about things like ISCET, in research, often people, if they don't have any other basis to go on, they will use ISCET guidelines to just as a default set of settings for their electrophysiology research. But I think I'd agree with Gemma that we need to avoid drifting too far towards research, because that's, we are looking at clinical applications. So I maintain that it is interesting if there are kind of nascent uses of clinical eye trackers that aren't being used much at the moment, but we probably do need to keep our focus on actual clinicians who are in need of guidance.
Okay. So I think we've got to kind of, coming back around to that background part, we've got to make that really quite clear. This is from the right people and not just researchers who are really trying to be helpful and contributing at this stage, but actually they don't need those clinical, making sure that our responses are meaningful and that we're actually presenting clinical eye tracker use accurately. Okay, so it seems like we would like some questions in the beginning. Who are you and where are you? Trying to capture accurately and describe, maybe we need to give some examples of, clinical eye tracker use. For example, do you record patients in a hospital, or because they could be still doing kind of work in a lab, but yet that information is transferred clinically and used. So we're not so bothered about where it's located. It's more, is that information being used as part of healthcare delivery? Okay. Obviously, I've got a very UK NHS view of that in terms of, healthcare, clinical setting. Internationally, would healthcare delivery translate? Would that accurately describe what we're trying to capture here? I appreciate we've got lots of different healthcare systems around the world.
It's a tricky one. I throw there a further question, and I don't know if it's relevant or not. Are we aware if there is any use, for example, for insurance purposes? And how do we classify that? Or these strange lateral fields that are a bit on the edge between healthcare in the traditional sense of the term and evaluation of some form of evaluation for purposes that are not purely research.
Yeah, I think this is where a US perspective would be very helpful here. I've certainly had some interesting conversations with kind of clinical people in Canada and America about some of the kind of clinical eye tracking being used in different kind of syndromes and in concussion and head injury, that kind of thing.
That's exactly what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. Okay. So insurance purposes.
Because that's not research and that's not healthcare delivery.
Yeah.
And that's not clinical activity, but it's probably something we want to capture. So somehow we need to phrase it.
Yeah. I guess it's that kind of clinical decision making, isn't it? Or informing clinical decisions.
Diagnostic?
Exactly. I think it's directly informing diagnostics here. And the problem, however, is what I think it was Björn was raising before. We don't want to be putting people in the condition of answering very uncomfortable questions, saying basically they're doing things they're not supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Now, I do have a feeling, and this is where I'm putting on my former industrial jacket, that we might need to go down an indirect route here. The people who do have this information much better than through a survey are the manufacturers, because they know who they're selling to, fundamentally, and they know why they're selling to. The problem being that will they tell us? Because that is typical information that is highly confidential.
No, we can ask, I guess. We may or may not get responses, but we can ask.
Yeah, I do think that if we also ask kind of manufacturers, I guess as your earlier point, Mario, it's kind of coming around at that question from a different perspective. If we said, do you have an opinion on what clinical guidelines would be helpful, I feel that they could hopefully answer that question without a conflict, because it may be they've got a good awareness of what people are coming to them to buy an eye tracker for, but they're not divulging that information, but they're still giving an opinion on what clinical conditions get mentioned. Matt?
Yeah, I would suggest that probably the manufacturers would be keen to work with us, because we're essentially trying to create a market for more clinical usage of eye trackers. But you've got the guidelines, it's going to be easier for new people to enter the field. So I would suggest that manufacturers would presumably tell us, yes, these things are being used for these conditions, and if they know of a particular condition where there's more interest, then that's going to be useful, because we can then go and come up with a standard for that, and more people can join the field. So hopefully, I guess so we can only ask, and if they don't give us the information, they don't. But hopefully everyone can work together.
Okay. So we had some questions in the Ask Everybody category, trying to capture who they are, their affiliation, and what they're using an eye tracker for. There were some questions added there about what do we feel is the most challenging part of the problem using eye trackers? What would your dream solution do? So that sounds more kind of practical. And what would you need to change to help you with your eye movement applications? C1, I think you added those comments. Do you want to come in on those?
Oh, just wanted to ask how we're going to help to identify the need to have a guideline. Yes, but feel free to change that, just some idea.
So in terms of kind of applications, are you thinking more kind of like how you apply their use to a clinical?
Yeah. Sorry, this application, I mean, that this clinical settings, they might have just to diagnose different the eye disease, something like that. I mean, just the eye movement, that's for these diagnostics.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it feels like we've got kind of some similar questions, but worded in multiple different ways. So I think what we probably need to do is kind of come up with like almost like a second draft here, doesn't it? And try and refine some of these kind of duplicated questions. And that's kind of how it worked in the last kind of piece of work, wasn't it, Matt? It was kind of a bit of an iterative process that we kept asking, are we
talking about the method reporting guide?
Yeah.
Separate group to ISCET, but yes, that was a similar process. I was going to suggest, actually, I think you really suggested the same thing. Do it as a second draft rather than taking all these questions and trying to tweak each one. Just use the, we can kind of have somebody could read through them and go, right, what's the feeling of these questions? Create a new set, rationalizing those into a smaller number if possible. I feel that might be a better way rather than trying to tweak individual questions and go one by one.
Yeah. Okay.
So almost, do a fresh draft, but use these as a reference point.
I'm aware as well that we probably don't want to add, that we don't want to kind of like lose the train of thought and lose the record of where we've started and progressed. So I think my preference would be to just kind of move to a whole separate draft of this. How do people feel about just kind of working on that as a bit of a working document and maybe having some sections that they're happy to contribute to, so that we maybe try and divide the work up a little bit? How do people feel about that?
Yep.
Couple of nods. Okay. So we've got background information, initial questions for everybody, manufacturer, individuals, clinical individuals, and professional bodies, and then we kind of added an other category if we feel that people come under something else. Do people, would they like to just kind of put their hand up for each section, or what? How do we
Yeah, Gemma, can I suggest that if you kind of assign one of us each to one of those sets of questions, and then maybe you do an overarching thing to make sure we're not duplicating across categories and that it kind of flows. So you would kind of create the next draft from all of those, and feel free to kind of eliminate and so on.
Okay.
You're kind of in charge here.
So action. So if I create second draft, allocate sections, do people have a strong preference for which section they work on, or are they happy to just be allocated any?
I would only warn that I'm not a clinician.
Okay.
So do be aware that I'm a person who does instrumentation.
Okay, so not clinical, instrumentation. Okay, any other disclaimers or kind of comments on that? Who feels like they're probably the best person to start on the clinical section?
I can do it if there's no one else. I don't actively work in clinic on a regular. Rasha, yeah, you're actually working as a clinician day to day, right? So is that why your hand's up? You're muted.
Rasha, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Like you can also help like what you prefer to take over each section, like what's the needed quickly, and then just to make sure that we're fitting.
Great. So do you feel that you do kind of use eye tracking clinically at the moment? So maybe you and Matt together could work on that section?
Yeah, but we need to define exactly the intense use of clinical eye tracking that you want, because someone else more than me could be using it, like that would have more in-depth experience. So like just give examples for.
Okay, Amanda.
I'm happy to be in the clinician section as well. I think that probably better fits with what I do.
Okay.
But similar to Matt, I'm in that academic setting as well. So yeah.
Okay. I mean, this certainly isn't set in stone. This is just a bit of a starting point to try and move forward to like a decent second draft, really. So please don't feel like you're just putting your name down for something and then it's never going to change. Matt?
Since you've got 2 on the clinician slide, just pick up professional bodies.
Okay. Anybody else have a strong preference for where they want to start? C1, did you say that your kind of experience is more kind of with clinical patients, but in that academic setting?
I'm not a clinician, so.
Okay. Who feels that they might be best suited to the kind of manufacturer side? Bjorn, I'm kind of looking, gazing in your direction.
Yes, I think that would be probably a good fit.
Okay. I think it doesn't mean that you have to obviously be that in entirety. It's just, do you feel like you've got a good start on that section? Okay. So I'm aware. And Onyeka, what do you feel is kind of a good fit for you?
I don't mind really. I'm not presently practicing clinically, so anyone would fit really.
Okay. Lovely. So if I find something else for you and C1 to maybe start with, is that all right? Yeah. Lovely. And then have we forgotten anyone? Just having a quick look down the list. So I'm aware there's just kind of a couple of minutes left. Is there anything anybody else would like to highlight next, Matt?
Yeah, just, I mean, this is really thinking forwards from this, but it might be worth having somebody looking at exactly where we're going to send it, getting a list together of, obviously that document I've just shared in the chat a little while back, it's got a list of all the potential places that we could ask, all the companies and professional bodies. There's probably far more there than we would really need to, but maybe we could have somebody assigned to just rationalizing that list, getting contact details so that when it comes to actually having a complete survey, we've got a list of email addresses to get it out to. And I guess when it comes to sending it to individual clinicians, we are going to have to do that via the professional bodies. So we'll have to say, look, you can fill this in as a professional body, but also please send this to all your members. Some will, some won't. So we're obviously going to miss some that way, but we can only do what we can do.
Yeah, and I'm sure within our networks, hopefully we can kind of cascade that to kind of various people. Yeah. My preference would be to include in the ethics that this could also be shared on social media. And does anybody have any feelings about that?
Where would you say share it on social media?
I don't know whether something like Twitter or potentially like Facebook groups.
LinkedIn I've seen surveys over there, and some professional, and of course, as Gemma mentioned, like Twitter. But also, I think what we need to discuss is like there are some groups in Facebook that are for professionals. I mean, you're putting the link. You're not like you're just reaching out. I think there should be no problem with that.
Mario, would you like to come on that?
There is a quirk about blanket unfiltered distribution, which I don't know how it will impact us, which is the characterization of non-responders. So we know who responds, we don't know who doesn't. And this non-responders often do carry information. So I would suggest, like Russia, LinkedIn, simply because it allows a much more targeted, and Facebook groups, because it allows much more targeted in rather than blanket distribution, and so we know who's not coming back to us.
Yeah.
But
I would just say that whatever we do, we need to make sure we've got a clear record of how it was distributed. Because if we're going to publish this, we need to say that. It may simply be that we sent an email on this date to our members of ISCET and asked them to distribute it to their networks. That's fine, but we just need to make sure that's clear.
If we intend to publish, we've already banged their nose. They will want a characterization of non-responders, an actual characterization. So we need to be very, very careful with this.
Anieka?
yeah, I was trying to say that the risk is always involved of us not knowing really who gets this questionnaire, because you put it on social media. From LinkedIn, someone could take it to WhatsApp and then it keeps going like that. So we really can't tell how far it has gone. So if we're ready to put it on social media, there's always a risk of losing some information about where it gets to, because it will surely go round.
Yeah, and I think we have to accept that when we're asking professional bodies to cascade it as well. So, for example, if we ask the British and Irish Orthoptic Society to do it, it would probably go on their Facebook page. So, even though we may choose to try and contain it, if we're asking people to disseminate it, they will use the methods which they use to communicate with their members. Amanda, did you have a point on this?
Yeah, I guess my point was, are we going to do it by a snowball effect rather than just the professional bodies as well? Because thinking it through, yes, I might go to the Optom Association here, but I was thinking more something like the Neurological Society and sending it out so that you're catching the audiology and other aspects as well that I otherwise don't interact with. So really thinking about that snowball network effect.
Yeah. One thing to mention, we've had a couple of PGR students who've had kind of questionnaire type things on social media, and they've had a lot of kind of like bot responses. So I think once things go out on Twitter and X, you kind of have to accept that you're going to need to do a lot of filtering of the responses. Okay, so I just want to say thank you to everybody. Is there any kind of final points? Because I appreciate we've just slightly run over 10, and for some people it's very late at night. So thank you, Amanda.
Just
Rasha?
a quick question. Will we just define what do we mean by clinical using clinical trackers in clinical setting in when we're asking people? Because, for example, it could be embedded. Do we also, for example, if someone is using, this was raised, someone is using a perimetry and it has like most devices had. So I mean, this is just a note that we need to say like examples or what we really want to reach.
Yeah,
it's okay
I think
even
that
to survey eye track perimetry, but I mean what we want to reach.
Yeah, I think that defining what we want people to respond and tell us is really important. So I think that will be that information at the beginning of the survey. We'll definitely include that as one of the sections. C1.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we needed to set a criteria for these responders. Like we can screen these responders. Like yes, just wanted to add this one.
Okay, thank you. So this is obviously a work in progress, but thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions. What I will do is get a kind of second draft together and send it out to you all. And then hopefully we can, once that's done, we can get some dates and some kind of deadlines together. So hopefully we can kind of keep all this moving. Was everybody okay with the doodle poll? I'm aware that not everybody in the working group has kind of come to this. So what we'll probably need to do is communicate with the wider working group to kind of let them know where we're up to and what our plan is. So that'll probably be the next thing I'll add that to my list. Lovely. So thank you, everyone. I shall let you go and have a lovely rest of day, lovely evening, wherever you are in the world. C1, it's probably very late for you as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Gemma, for
Thank
organizing.
you.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank you
now.
so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.